For decades, Goldeneye 64 has remained the highest rated of all the James Bond games. Now, with 007 First Light on the horizon, I ask the inevitable question, can the Bond franchise finally produce a game worthy of dethroning the legacy? Goldeneye isn't just remembered fondly because of nostalgia. If that was the case, its reputation wouldn't have endured for nearly 3 decades, despite multiple attempts to recapture that lightning in a bottle. No successor has truly matched it, from the bizarre detour of Goldeneye Rogue Agent to the largely forgotten Goldeneye Reloaded, a reboot starring Daniel Craig, which was absolutely god-awful. The franchise has spent years in the original game's shadow, so what exactly made Goldeneye so special? For me, a huge part of it comes down to the story itself. Even among Bond films, Goldeneye stood apart because its central conflict felt deeply personal. Alec Trevelyan, Agent 006, wasn't just another flamboyant, narcissistic supervillain threatening global destruction. He was Bond's former ally and fellow 00 agent, someone shaped by the same brutal MI6 training that created Bond himself. Trevelyan's betrayal created emotional weight because of that shared history. Sean Bean's portrayal gave Alec Trevelyan a grounded, believable anger that just made him feel far more human than the franchise's usual larger-than-life villains. He wasn't driven by the need to crash the global economy or set up a secret underground base with a private army. He was broken, resentful, and convinced MI6 had ruined his life. That dynamic translated perfectly into the game. When we played Goldeneye, we weren't simply shooting faceless henchmen, well, not all the time anyway, but we were stepping into a spy thriller built around betrayal, loyalty, and revenge. It gave Goldeneye a sense of identity that many Bond games since just have lacked. Interestingly, 007 First Light appears to be revisiting that same formula. This time Bond is hunting 009, a rogue agent connected to a failed 00 program. The setup immediately invokes shades of Trevelyan, and that could be a very smart move on behalf of IO. But for me, if First Light wants to reach the same heights as Goldeneye, the relationship between Bond and 009 needs to feel personal. The emotional stakes matter just as much as the ridiculous car chases and explosions. Supporting characters will be equally important. Goldeneye succeeded because its cast was unforgettable. Characters like Xenia Onatop, Natalia Semyonova, General Oromov, and Boris Grushenko all brought personality and charm to the experience. I mean, who can forget this?
Yes! I am invincible!
They made the world feel alive and distinctly Bond. First Light needs that same level of memorable character writing if it hopes to stand out. Then there's the gameplay itself, arguably the biggest reason Goldeneye became iconic in the first place. At its core, the game was just simply fun to play. The mission structure made us feel like spies rather than soldiers. Objectives involved sabotaging facilities, stealing intelligence, planting trackers, and rescuing hostages instead of just clearing rooms full of enemies. Even when the stealth systems were fairly limited by modern standards, the fantasy remained intact. We still felt like James Bond, going around with a silenced PP7. That's where First Light looks especially promising. Rather than leaning fully into the run-and-gun action, the game appears to emphasise espionage and social manipulation. Bond's charm, wit, and improvisation are reportedly woven directly into the gameplay mechanics, allowing players to bluff their way through checkpoints or talk themselves out of dangerous situations. That's a genuinely clever interpretation of the Bond fantasy, and arguably something previous games have struggled to capture. The license to kill mechanic is another interesting addition. Unlike Goldeneye, where you could effectively run and gun every mission if you felt like it, First Light seems to be designed to discourage this approach. Bond can only open fire in situations where lethal force is justified, pushing players towards stealth, deception, and tactical decision-making instead. Ironically, that could make First Light even more authentically Bond than Goldeneye ever did. Right now, 007 First Light feels like a game with enormous potential, but whether it can truly challenge GoldenEye's legacy will depend more on the emotional investment. Bond needs a reason to care beyond simply saving the world yet again, because the best Bond stories and the best Bond games aren't really about stopping the supervillains. They're about the people behind the mission, the betrayals that cut deepest, and the thin line between agent and weapon. If First Light understands this, then it may well have a shot at becoming one of the best Bond game fans have had since 1997. What are your thoughts?
Die got this good!